Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. I'm Morgan McClintock, the CEO of startup marketing agency Firebrand. We've launched this podcast to interview the best in the business, but I'm not going to do it alone. So please meet my co-hosts.
I'm Nicole, Firebrand's VP of Content Marketing.
And I'm Chris Ulbrich, Firebrand's Head of Media Relations.
I'm Ian Lipner, a tech PR and crisis communications veteran.
We'll drop a new episode each week, so there's plenty of fuel for your marketing fire. Get the spark you need to take your startup to a whole new level. Hello, and welcome to Fired Up, the startup marketing podcast. My name is Morgan McClintock, and it is the holidays. So happy holidays to you all. And today we have a very special edition for you all. And the gang is all here. So there's Nicole Pytel, Chris Ulbrich, and Ian Lipner. Hey, guys.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Morgan.
Hey there.
And today we are going to have a slightly different format. It's our predictions episode. And we will be going through the predictions that we made last year to give ourselves a little bit of an assessment and give ourselves a grade. And we'll be talking about our predictions for 2024. Let's dive right in with perhaps the most contentious one. I said last year that disruptive technologies would not be a big factor, specifically calling out, that startups would not get spun up about the metaverse and generative AI technologies having a major impact on their business, their go-to-market, or their marketing programs. I think probably we're okay on the metaverse. That just didn't pan out. But how are we feeling about our assessment on Gen AI, Chris?
Yeah, I think you're being a little too hard on yourself. Frankly, I think you got it right as far as generative AI's impact on businesses day to day and their marketing programs. I mean, it's clear that generative AI is going to be transformative over the long run, or there's a very high probability that it will be, but I don't see many businesses that are so heavily dependent now on generative AI that you would consider it strategic to their operations. If you deleted generative AI from any business I'm aware of, that business would continue to operate pretty much as well as it did previously. What you're seeing a lot of companies do right now, large and small, is experiment with generative AI. But the problem that, especially in a B2B context, that they all need to get around is simply that while generative AI can produce content that is dependably interesting and dependably competent, it's not dependably correct. And for any function where being correct matters, you need to check the work. And if you need to check the work, imagine if you had a calculator you couldn't trust and you had to check its calculations by hand every time. You wouldn't think of that as a great labor savings. Now, in certain niches, as you pointed out in your prediction last year, organization of ideas, outlining of ideas, brainstorming, generative AI is really promising. And, I think we've all used it profitably in our own work. But again, those are very sort of targeted use cases. And I think it's rare to see someone so dependent that you could slap the labels on the technology, that you could slap the label strategic on it. So frankly, I think you got it right.
Yeah. And, we did talk about it a little bit in the Forge and talk about its impact coming on technology itself. So I don't want to make it sound like we don't think Gen AI had a huge impact on the market at large and in the market's plans. And certainly the stock market, right, was buoyed by a belief in, the semiconductor industry that we're going to be doing a lot more computing going forward. But yes, I think that you're right. I have not yet been replaced by Gen AI, regardless of whether people care about whether my opinion is correct.
Yeah. And there are a couple of things in what you just said that are, worth pointing out. The Gen AI had an undeniable huge impact on the economy at large as people put bets on the technology that would enable AI. So NVIDIA's stock price soared as investors placed bets on that company remaining central to AI operations. Databases that enable AIs saw an influx of funding and an influx of business. And it's just, so economically, there was a big impact, but it's it seemed largely about institutions and people placing bets on the future rather than reflecting any impact that the technology is having right at this moment. But the other thing that's worth pointing out is that AI is not just Gen AI. The form of AI that is having an impact on businesses right now, where is various kinds of machine learning and mathematical prediction, which does not take the form of the familiar chatbot that we know from ChatGPT or Microsoft Windows Copilot, or the various products that create art when you type in a description. That's generative AI, but the impact of that is still TBD. But there's no question that on, say, stock trading or logistics, the routing of cargo vessels, the more mathematical forms of AI are having an impact right now. And a lot of the economic impact that we saw this year also relates to that. So I just think it's important that we sort of recognize that a Gen AI gets all the attention, but the other forms of AI might be making more of an immediate economic impact and have more of an impact on people's lives in the short run.
We'll give ourselves that we got that one right then. Okay. And the metaverse, which we didn't talk about there. I love the metaverse. We did a lot of stuff around Second Life. It just, from a marketing perspective, hasn't featured this year. Our second prediction was around ABM for startups and account-based marketing. Most of the platforms there aim at larger enterprise scale companies. And we had said, hey, these companies are going to come down and more startups are going to want to move towards an ABM type motion, and that the platforms would enable that. But you can also do a lot of it with the existing tools. How do you think we did on that one, Nicole?
Spot on. And we've seen this throughout the year. We're seeing more and more clients asking about it. What is it? How can we get started? And to your point, it doesn't require a big, fancy, expensive platform. There's a lot that we can do, almost like an ABM Lite with existing tools and systems. I mean, there's a lot you can do just if you have a target account list. There's a lot we can do with that. And we're starting to see, in the enterprise world, ABM has been a thing for years. And it was kind of just, to your point, what the big businesses were doing, and the smaller guys were kind of left out of it. And that couldn't be further from the truth right now. And we saw that build as the year went on. And I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger into 2024 as budgets shrink, buyers get even more, cautious, and the money has to go where it can generate the best return. And right now, ABM is that solution.
Right. And I would say the companies we're talking to at the moment, increasingly, they want to move towards that ABM type motion. And how do they go on that journey? What are the first steps they can take, and how can they make that successful and build the confidence within the business that this is the right direction to go? So I'm going to say on the second one, we got that right. The third one, we said that, look, there will be a big need for more content as buy cycles extended and startups needed to keep their prospects engaged over a longer period. They wanted to target them with different types of content, not just written content, but visual content, so that they could keep them engaged. So sticking with you, Nicole, given that you're leading content marketing, what do you think?
You were spot on this one too. And I'm thrilled because you wrote this post a few weeks before I joined. And,
That's right.
And I was thrilled to see you say, hey, content isn't just copy, it's the engine room. And I think that's what people are beginning to learn, is that it's not just a good writer. A good writer does not make a good content marketer. They're two very different things. And I think going back to generative AI, that's one of the things that we're seeing. It cannot market for you. It may be able to write iffy content for you, but it can't market for you. So I think you got this absolutely spot on. We're seeing this from our clients. We're seeing, to your point, buy cycles are getting longer. I think the average sales cycle for a B2B SaaS product is 9 months right now. I mean, that's a long time that you have to keep people engaged. And as those buying committees get bigger and bigger, that's more and more people that you have to have a conversation with and convince that you're the right choice. And the only way to have that conversation on an ongoing basis is with a full funnel of content.
Right. We also predicted that attribution would become more important. And by that, we mean understanding what parts of the marketing efforts are working, what's impacting sales, and in what way. What does that buyer journey actually look like? And then later in the year, we actually, as a result of this, did a partnership with a company called Ruler Analytics, which is part of this sort of emerging field of attribution platforms, dedicated platforms that look at that buyer journey in its entirety, because a lot of your tools like a HubSpot will have a look back window of 60, 90 days. They'll track people up to a certain point, but if they came in via a blog post or something earlier than that, you have no idea. It's just dark to you. Whereas these new platforms have a much more sophisticated way of doing that over a longer period. And so I think on attribution, every company that we talk to is dialing that in. And the fact that there are these new platforms rising that come into the already pretty busy MarTech stack is proof that that is important. So I think on our fourth one here, we've got that right. I'm a bit less sure on this last one. We had predicted that companies would revamp their messaging, that they would see the market was tough, that they would dial down some of the sort of, vitamin type messages that would be nice to have, and they would dial up some more of the real sort of painkiller and really try and get closer to that ROI messaging. Ian, did we see much revamping of messaging?
I'm not sure. I think we saw people start moving toward the concept of savings more and more, and the pendulum, so to speak, moving toward that. I do think that some of the uncertainty in the first half of the year sort of began to go away as the year went. And, now we see folks who seem to believe that we've achieved a soft landing and are getting ready to make their marketing plans accordingly for next year. Of course, that's never without another boogeyman on the horizon in the second half of 2024 that we're to be thinking about. It's safe to say that we're still on that side of caution and of savings versus the growth message out there.
I don't think we've seen so much maybe of revamping the messaging house as much as we've seen startups really try to dial in their unique value, which is a big form of messaging. Maybe it's not a who we are, what we do, how we do it revamp. It's more of a what is our unique value? What are our differentiators, and getting those out into the market, whether it's through content or PR or digital or whatever it is. So maybe give you halvesies on this one, Morgan.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say something, similar that, we all in working with different clients are going to report on different parts of the elephant, but I feel like insofar as we've seen clients revamp their messaging, it's been, to Nicole's point, dialing in both their value proposition, but also the particular verticals and types of customers that they want to serve. They've gotten a lot more rigorous about, rather than casting a wide net, figuring out exactly where they have the most appeal and focusing their marketing and sales resources on those areas. So I think when times were good, when everybody was flush and the sky was the limit, a lot of the companies in the B2B space were just trying to, just had big dreams, and like anything was possible, any customer was possible. But as always, the downturn enforced a certain discipline on their marketing and product efforts. So I do think we saw that reflected in the messaging.
Okay, so I think giving ourselves half a point on the messaging depends on your experience in there. Let's move on to our next part of this, where we're going to talk about predictions for 2024. And we made these back in the middle of November. So things are already moving apace, particularly with this first one, that Twitter, or X as it's now known, will continue its decline, and that the CEO, Linda Yaccarino, will be out by the end of Q1 2024. And you might feel that, hey, this is a bit of a safe bet. But since this prediction, even Elon Musk at DealBook has berated all the advertisers, and Linda has dug in her defense of him. So she's doubling down. But what do we think, Chris?
Well, to be scrupulously fair, he laid into advertisers who left.
Yes, because their job is to support the public square of Twitter through their ad revenue, and people will be outraged if they pull out.
Right. And then Yaccarino followed up expressing thanks to those advertisers who stayed and stuck with the mission. But yes, it's becoming increasingly clear that Twitter's strategy is not, such as it has one, its advertising strategy is not working. And Elon is sabotaging it every week. He seems even to be acknowledging that the situation is bleak. He's starting to make the kinds of comments you make, a lot of gallows humor and, sort of disturbing comments about the state of his own mental health, even when he talks about just what an awful place his own mind is. You wouldn't want to be in my mind. It's not going to sound very encouraging for anyone that X is trying to persuade to partner with it, to advertise with it. It feels like an untenable situation. The only question really is how long Yaccarino wants to hold on or can hold on. The election year will be a major test of that. You can just imagine if things are as bad as they are right now, it's only going to get worse once the words start flying during 2024 and, Elon's wading in on the issue of the day. It's just going to make her job even harder. I would expect her. So this is a question not of if, but when. It's an over-under call. I would guess internally, this is my crystal ball projection. I would guess she's thinking she's going to hold on until after the election and leave after that, because it would be, it would be a huge story, because if she were to leave before that, in the middle of the election year, it would be seen as a result of something Elon did or said. And I think she would try to avoid that if she has any option, if she feels she has any option. So she would have to really be pushed into an absolutely impossible position to leave during the year. But we've seen a lot of crazy things happen over the last 12 months. So it's not outside the realm of possibility, but I'm betting she hangs on till after.
I cannot wait to see who's right on this one, because Chris, you're giving her about 9 months more than Morgan's giving her. So we're going to come back to this and see which one of you was right.
Yeah. Either way, if she has left, it will be because something blew up. It'll be the equivalent of the Access Hollywood tape in the middle of this election season. And so that will be a story. And if she hangs on, that will be a story too.
All right. So there we have it. I do think, though, that the XAI with Twitter, all Twitter's data that they have, they may not make money out of advertising, but the data that they have, and now the new XAI, which is Elon's new AI company, Gen AI company, could be a bit of a savior for its overall valuation. So maybe that's the game that he's playing. Our next prediction here is that programmatic advertising is going to get a lot harder due to increasing privacy. And, we might well see that come through regulation. But companies like Google are increasing, Apple has before completely changed the advertising industry. And now here is Google quietly, I think, starting to cloak IP addresses in Chrome, which is obviously the browser that many people use. And without cookies, third-party cookies, IP addresses have been a sort of proxy for who is this person and how do I match that to their behaviors and their interests. And if you take that away, it gets harder to sort of fingerprint exactly which users they are and then sort of target them accurately, which from an advertising perspective is a challenge, right? So increasing privacy, making advertising a lot harder. What do you think, Nicole?
Definitely going to make it harder. I'm curious to see if the third-party cookie apocalypse is actually going to happen, because I think they've been delaying it now, for the last couple of years. So we'll see if it actually happens. Maybe that's a prediction in and of itself. Will it actually happen? There's a possibility that Google may inadvertently just push more advertisers onto LinkedIn, where you know exactly who you're getting, who you're targeting. You can target by company, by job role, by company size, all of those things that if it gets really hard on Google, LinkedIn just looks like more of a sure bet for advertising dollars, where the pie is getting smaller and smaller and smaller of what companies, especially startups, can spend.
Yeah, I think it's not just LinkedIn, it's any walled garden, right? And that can, include Facebook. We don't talk about that as much with B2B, but we're seeing that even the cable company becomes more valuable, right? Because my cable provider knows not only what I'm watching on television, but also which sites I'm visiting based on my router. There's nothing that Google can do about that, right? And then I think we'll probably talk about this a little bit more. It sort of now makes you as an individual company think about first party data a lot more carefully, which forces risk upon a lot of companies that aren't ready to take that risk on. So it's the kind of thing where I kind of agree with you, Nicole. There's lots of reasons for this to get slowed down on the way.
So maybe we'll see that. Maybe this will just push money elsewhere. Of course, Google's own advertising is going to change massively with the more sort of search generative experience you're getting there. So I think the Google Ads is going to change significantly during the 2024, and we may be having a very different discussion at the end of next year. Our next prediction is that content is going to become more visual and more interactive, and that's not just because it's easier to do, and it is, but also because I think there's a certain tiredness with the traditional kind of conversion events that, the ebooks, etc., that some companies are relying on. And also because as Gen AI cranks out more sort of low level just words, we just become sort of deluged with that. We'll need more video type content, audio content, podcasts or what have you, that are generated by a real person. And that's something that at present, some of the technologies really struggle to emulate. But what do we think about that?
There's no doubt. And it's not easier necessarily to create visual and interactive content. You could say it's a whole lot harder to do it and do it well. Not everybody can slap together a really cool infographic or, a really cool interactive web page, but it's something that brands are going to have to do because you're right. People don't just want to download an ebook anymore. That's not how we consume things anymore, just in the rest of our lives. We go on and we look at short form videos where we want to see cool stuff. I mean, it's like how many words is the average person exposed to in a day? It's like tens of thousands of words. So, in a noisy market, and it's always a noisy market, but we have tools at our disposal now to create stuff that's really cool looking and really attention grabbing and gives you that half-second pause. And that's all you need is for somebody to take half a second to stop what they're doing, to look at what you've created. That's a win right there. So this isn't even just this is what buyers want. This is an absolute imperative for businesses, especially smaller startups that don't have the giant brand awareness that the bigger guys have.
And I think also the generational differences in the way we're consuming content is just demographically starting to rear its head, right? So we're not talking about millennials anymore, folks. We're talking about Gen Z and what they want. And it's different again. And it sounds like it's going to be harder unless we adapt. We have to learn not just kind of what messages resonate, but what forms of message resonate most. And those that experiment first will figure it out first.
Well, to that point, our next sort of prediction is around TikTok. So, here's a quote from the Reuters Institute director Rasmus Nielsen, and he says there's no reasonable grounds for expecting that those born in the 2000s will suddenly come to prefer old-fashioned websites, let alone broadcast and print, simply because they grow older. So these audiences are not consuming news in a traditional way that older demographics might, and they're not coming back. And so our prediction here is, look, B2B brands targeting Gen Z not only need the video format, but they need to go where they are, to Ian's point, and that is largely on TikTok. And TikTok is going to have an absolutely massive year in 2024 with the election, despite people's fears about whatever China might be doing. it is a booming network. And I think B2B companies and startups, as they produce more video, are going to need to get their hands around TikTok somehow, or at least start experimenting with what might work. And if you get through the whole of 2024 and you haven't sort of put your toe in the water, your competitors may get ahead with a really important demographic, and they'll have learned the lessons that you are yet to learn.
You're right. I mean, Gen Z is going to be the majority of the workforce, in another year or so? We have to cater to them. Interestingly enough, I saw earlier today, I think it was research from Pew, that says folks even younger than that, in their teens, they actually like YouTube better than TikTok. So it's going to be interesting to see what some of these younger generations do. But absolutely, we have to go to them because they're not going to come to us.
I'm going to take a more skeptical line on this one. I think overall, what Nicole's describing is on point, like especially the comment about YouTube. I mean, there seems to be no question that younger generations are gravitating more toward video than they are toward written content. I think as we saw with Facebook and even Twitter next to, say, LinkedIn, just because a service is popular doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be relevant to business or to every kind of business. So Facebook, for instance, was highly relevant to consumer brands. I think it was very rare for B2B brands, or it is still now it's Meta. Like, it's still rare for Facebook to be a very important channel for a B2B brand because it just doesn't have business in its DNA. I think TikTok does not have business in its DNA. Its DNA is very casual, very fun. So I can absolutely see companies using it in sort of sassy marketing campaigns, sort of rebellious marketing campaigns that they want to establish themselves as a brand with a voice, a brand with an edge. But I would imagine that most of the sort of block and tackle marketing, insofar as it migrates to video, is going to migrate to something like YouTube. I mean, one of the things I've noticed just having kids myself and in working with people from younger generations than mine is that they're more inclined to DIY based on video. So I think you're seeing sort of an analogous shift, just how it is in sales, how sales is shifting more toward sales engineers or pre-sales engineers from traditional sales, where the salesperson introduces you to the product. Now you're seeing buyers do their own research ahead of time and then interact with the brand, and they want to talk to someone who's a little more technologically versed, can help them put together a pilot. I feel like we're seeing that same tendency unfold in marketing, where the person interacting with your brand will do their research ahead of time and they'll want some DIY content to orient themselves to the product. And that I think YouTube's better set up for that. So again, overall video, yes, I'm not convinced about TikTok as the actual the channel that's going to be most relevant.
So those are predictions that we put up in the post in November. I'd be interested what you think. Nicole, you got any predictions for us?
In addition to what we've talked about, I think trust is going to become king. I think we always say, content is king. And as a content nerd, I hate to be dethroned, but I think trust is king. And I think content's how you get there. But in a world where there's less money to spend, there's fewer buyers, there's more competition, there's a lot more stuff going on in the background. You've got to be able, if you're going to commit to doing business with somebody, it's not just about having the right product or the right solution. It's who do I trust, not only with my money, but with my reputation internally, with my boss. I have to justify that decision. And so I think we're going to have to see a lot with trust, which kind of goes against this whole AI wave that we're seeing, where we're seeing talking avatars and generative AI content. And I think it's going to make everybody really have to up their game and think about, how do I make prospects not just like what I do, but trust me to do it?
Ian, you had some thoughts about trust in the pre-show when we were talking. Perhaps you want to jump off that one.
Yeah, no, I would say that what Nicole's talking about is correct. You have this sort of explosion of content. We're going to be in an election year where you're asking a user of the web over and over again to make a choice, right? And they're going to be fatigued from the amount of information that they're processing, from the amount of choice that, who are you kind of choices that they're going to be asked to make in 2024. And then there's this other problem of who made that content? Is that content really from you, or are you just a bot that is here to upset me so that, I will be further engaged? I think that we have a danger of that sort of spreading out to brands, right? Like, where certainly we've, seen over the past the blue check issue on Twitter, like, whose account is this? And the worst case scenario, of course, are deep fakes, whether it's our political leaders or the wrongly targeted CEO. Those are questions that I think will become more on the table than they've ever been before.
Yeah.
And when it comes to making a buying decision, the explosion of synthetic content will really challenge authenticity.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming easier to train a model on your own with a shorter and shorter amount of your own video, and it will then mirror your voice and your face, and an avatar will, be created. And so, when you come to a website, is this a real person? Have they just used some kind of model to produce it? It's going to be hard. And either we won't care because, hey, this is just someone talking through a blog post, and it doesn't really matter whether it's the trained model explaining it or the actual person taking the time to do it. Or maybe we'll really bounce off that authenticity and go, I don't trust any of it. Like, I don't like it. I can't tell the difference, and it'll be really off-putting, and punching through that is going to be a real challenge.
And I think in 2024, there will be a lot of bad synthetic content that isn't convincing because it's not of high quality. A few more years, who knows? I think what we'll see first is sort of a backlash against this low quality content.
Absolutely. Chris, look in your crystal ball. What have you got?
With the decline of Twitter, I've been sort of looking at the fragmentation of the journalistic community that used to center on Twitter and where that community is migrating. And it is, it's a highly fragmented situation at the moment. And I don't expect that to change over the next year. I think by this time next year, we're going to be saying that journalists have sort of split amongst several services. That poses a challenge for professionals like us who are trying to keep an eye on, journalist activity on these different networks and trying to understand what they're thinking about, caring about. It feels to me like if I had to place a long-term bet and I were to take business considerations out of it, if all of these services manage to persist, I would bet on blue sky over the long run. It feels to me like the Twitteriest of the new Twitter-like services. But right now we're seeing, I was mentioning earlier in our pre-talk, like weird Twitter has migrated over to blue sky. So a lot of the humor accounts, the sort of edgy and interesting, and just sort of, the sources of strange tweets are now doing their thing on blue sky. And the reporters who have a more voicey persona have tended to migrate to blue sky as well. Whereas Threads feels more like the LinkedIn of Twitters to me. It's much more professional. The sort of daily affirmation Twitter has gone over to Threads. So you see a lot more establishment journalists there. And, Mastodon has a really sort of early internet kind of feel to it. I struggle to find a comparison. It's probably most like this old bulletin board forum, The Well. Very few people even remember it anymore, but it was a home to a lot of the sort of techno-utopians and sort of wide-eyed dreamers of the early internet, musicians and artists and idealists. And Mastodon has that feel, and a certain number of journalists, mostly the artistically inclined and those who are really averse to conflict, tend to prefer Mastodon, but that I think feels like a very small group. But on top of that, we're seeing increasing mutterings that there's a contingent of journalists that is starting to say, you know what, if you actually look at how my content performs on all these different channels, Twitter still has it for me. So, setting aside my concerns about the management and so on, there are a number of journalists who still feel that their content performs best on Twitter. So I think that all of these channels are going to be in play, and it's going to be a challenge for marketers going forward. Like I said, if I had to bet, it would be blue sky over the long term, but I don't expect it to emerge as the clear winner in 365 days.
So we're still going to use Twitter, but we're going to have to be on Mastodon, Blue Sky, Threads, tracking individual reporters, because that's what their preference might be. And they're going to need to be with the bigger sort of influencers where they can get direct contact to the people that they want. So they may migrate depending on who they need to access, I guess. So there's lots of good predictions in there. Really enjoyed that conversation. It's the holidays. And so happy New Year to you all, and, happy holidays. Any particular family traditions for you, Nicole, that you like to do over the holidays?
Holidays for me are family, food, and football. Not always in that order. Sometimes football comes first. But that is where you will find me between Christmas and New Year's, is watching as many bowl games as possible, eating as much of my mother's cooking as humanly possible, and then going on a massive diet in January. That's the tradition. What
about you, Ian?
I'll pop a bottle of vintage champagne on New Year's and decide whether the 2004 year gives me any clue to 2024.
And what about you, Chris?
Well, to me, the Christmas season kicks off with the first play of Chris Isaak's album, Christmas, which is a collection of a few of his own songs and great covers of classics by, Elvis and Sinatra. The songs you're familiar with, but done in Chris Isaak style. And it reminds me of, my family. I've been playing it for years and years. It was a favorite of my mother's. And so, it's something I always look forward to, is breaking that out for a couple of weeks, a month in the Christmas and New Year's season. And so that's been a real joy. And there's a new one out just a couple of years ago. So getting that in rotation as well has been a lot of fun.
How about you, Morgan?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I have family coming for Christmas, and I really love that. And we do the traditional turkey and the fall Christmas dinner. So I just like that moment when all the cooking is done, everyone sits down around the table, we do the crackers and everything. I just think it's brilliant, and you can sort of celebrate a great year. So I've really enjoyed this. Thank you all for joining us and sharing your predictions. We'll find out if we're right. And it only remains to say happy holidays to you and a happy new year to all of our listeners.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Well, that about wraps it up for today. But before we close, we did want to offer all of our Fired Up friends a chance to grab a mega pack of all of our ebooks and guides. That's our guide to content marketing. That's our startup guide to paid media using Google Ads. It's our guide to attribution. You can get all of those, over 100 pages of goodness, at firebrand.marketing/fired up freebies. That's freebies with an S. And we hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, or drop us a note at firebrand.marketing. And as ever, the details of how to get in touch with our guest today can be found in the show notes. Thank you for listening. And until next week, get out there and crush your marketing goals.